In this video, I'm going to tell you about what you can do when your friendly local game store isn't all that friendly. So this question came from a viewer a little while back during an episode of the Every Other Sunday show where I asked about subjects and things like that for future videos. And this one, the question goes like this. Any advice on what to do when your FLGS, which stands for Friendly Local Game Store, is missing the friendly part? My local game store manager and players have a very insular clique mentality and are not welcoming to new players. Also, it's the only store in town. Well, in those situations, if it wasn't the only store in town, I would certainly tell you to go try the other store or stores, because a store that's not welcoming is, in my opinion, not really deserving of your business. Now, a number of years back, I did a video about why you should support your local game store. Pachow. And I still believe it. Now, a lot of comments in that particular video were very interesting because they would start with things like, well, my local game store is terrible and I hate it and it's on fire and it's run by wild bears and I never go in there, so why would I support it? I'm maybe exaggerating things a bit, but there were a lot of comments saying, I hate my local store and I never go in there. Well, why would I support it? Well, you wouldn't. Actually, the point of that whole video was if you go to your local game store all the time to play miniatures games with your friends or people that you meet on some sort of online service and whatnot, let's say something like Game 4, but you don't ever buy anything there. You buy all your stuff online or you buy it wherever, but you play at this one place. That was the point of that video, is that if you want that store to be available to you so you can keep playing at that store and you like going there, then you should buy things there. Now, this situation is very different in that it is, I want to go to this store and play there and even purchase things, but they are not welcoming. Now, there's a difference between not welcoming and maybe not great at retail. Those are two different things. There are many, many game store owners who are gamers. Actually, the majority of them are. Many of them, as it turns out, to be perfectly honest, are gamers first and business people, retail experts, whatnot, second. So if you walk into a local shop and a person at the counter looks up at you and is like, hey, welcome to such and such. Let me know if you need anything. And then goes back to whatever they're doing, the web, reading, gluing miniatures together, whatever. That's just not great retail. That's a person who's maybe a bit shy, but they still run this game store because they love it. And, or maybe they're just one of those people that doesn't want to, like when they walk into any kind of store, they don't want salespeople in their face. And so that's just the way that they've kind of designed their store. Now, to some folks who walk into that store, they can look at that as being unwelcoming because the person just barely, in their mind, kind of said, hey. But in that situation, again, like I said, it can just sometimes be this person is not necessarily a retail expert first. They're but very potentially a gaming expert. So if you look around for a while and then you come over and you ask them about, a certain type of paint, because you're into miniatures, or are these forces, really good with this forces, or if you're, into other types of, tabletop gaming, you can ask them about magic, whatever. You may find that they are very, forthcoming with knowledge and wisdom and all that kind of information that can help you make great decisions. And that's one of the big benefits, again, of a brick and mortar store versus going online. But you may have to tease it out of them a little bit, okay? So that's something that you have to kind of differentiate when you're thinking about, is this place welcoming, or is it just that the person, whether it's the owner or the manager or whatever, is maybe just not a super people person. Now, as I mentioned, the word manager, in that question that was asked that I started off the episode with, the person was talking about the manager and their clique. So one of the things that you can do in this situation, if the manager and the clique of their friends are beyond, just not welcoming, let the owner of the store know. You know what I mean? If the manager is doing this, the owner of the store very possibly may not know. And so I'm not telling you need to tattle on this person, don't get me wrong, but the owner would really probably like to know what the manager's doing in this situation, because this really affects the owner's bottom line, right? So figure out if there's some sort of time when the owner is in the store. Pretty much every store owner in most situations is usually in the store at some point. Sometimes it's maybe earlier in the day or whatever. But try to find out when the owner's there and try to stop in and say, look, I just wanted to talk to you and let you know about how I felt when I came in here and what's going on. I don't know if you're, if you know this is happening. Now, if the owner says, okay, well, I really appreciate that. That's very interesting and seems genuinely a bit surprised about all this stuff, then hopefully they're going to have a talk with the manager. Now, we're not trying to get anybody fired here, but we do, you want to help this store out. A store that is unwelcoming to people because the person who kind of runs it, the manager, and their sort of cronies drive everybody else away, that makes the business go away more often than not. So the owner wants to know this. So if the owner can go to the manager and go, look, this is what I expect. You need to do this and this and this, be more welcoming. Then at that point, the manager can make a decision. They either say, okay, I'll try to do that. Or they can say, well, I don't like to be welcoming to people, and they can, jog on. So in this situation, talking to the owner is super important because the owner's going to want to know, in most situations, that this is what's going on in their store. So, that's great if you get that response. Now, however, you might get a different response. You might get the response where you tell the owner this and the owner gets very defensive and the owner says, well, I don't believe that's the case, or something along those lines. Now, at that point, you've discovered something. You've discovered that this is coming top down from the ownership. The owner and probably the manager and the clique, they like to get together and do all their stuff and kind of keep other folks away. Yet they probably also complain when there's not enough business. So in that situation, when you get a owner who says to you, I don't really believe what you're saying, and I don't think that's great that you're coming here to tell me about this stuff and whatnot, that point you can then decide it's time for me probably not to come back to this store. So what do you do in that situation when you've got a store in your town and as in the question originally, it said this is the only store in town. What do you do when this is the only store in town and they just don't want people there from ownership on down? They just don't want people, whatever the problem is, people who play like you do, people who potentially look like you do, people who, whatever the problem is, when they're not being welcoming and inclusive into the industry, then, like I said at the beginning, you don't need to spend your money there. So what do? Well, obviously, there is hopefully, maybe the next town over, another game store. Now, admittedly, that's a little bit more travel than you'd like, but if you want to be able to play at game stores, especially if you're meeting new people, this is kind of an important thing because, as I've said in the past, it's frequently you don't want to have somebody that you've never met before come over to your house. So if you find somebody, whether it's online, like I mentioned, using Game 4 or using some other app or whatever the deal is, and you find this person and you want to get together and play, you may end up having to go a little bit further away. If they say, oh, hey, let's play at such and such store, the store in your town that you're not going to anymore, well, then you can either explain it to them and say, well, I don't feel like it's a great place to go, and these are the reasons why. If that person's like, oh, I like everybody there and it's great, now you've learned another thing. You've learned that this person is maybe not necessarily the person that you're going to want to play with long term. If they go, though, that's true, I've had that same sort of feeling when I've gone into that store. Now at least you seem to be on the same wavelength, and then maybe the two of you meet someplace else just to hang out and whatever, not even play, maybe just talk, miniatures games, talk about your armies, maybe bring your armies and show them off in something like at the library or whatever, and get that out of the way. And then once you've met and gotten used to it, to each other, then maybe you get together and play over at your house or at their house or something like that. Or go to the next city over and play at that shop that seems to be more welcoming than the one in your own town. Our particular hobby, miniatures, in many situations, it's about playing in stores because it is a little bit more you playing against people that you've not met before. In board gaming, generally you're playing with your friends because just one person brings out the board and you play. When you are playing in miniatures, it's about me having my stuff and you having your stuff, and then we have to kind of get our stuff together and meet someplace. And it's just very convenient to meet at a great, friendly local game store because they usually have tables set aside, they usually have terrain, to some degree. And so it's really useful, especially for the first couple of times that you guys get together. Over time, though, sometimes you do start to want to get together at your own house, use your own terrain, maybe have some adult beverages while you're playing and having a great time, and you've expanded your group into more people. But, that's kind of a bit down the road. First things first, when you find a shop in your local town, maybe it's new, maybe you're new to town, whatever, and you find that you don't feel welcome when you're in there, try to figure out what you can do about it. Talk to, if it's, say, the manager that's doing it, first of all, talk to them and say, look, this is how it comes across, and I just wanted to have this conversation with you. If they're super defensive and they're the manager, then maybe you want to talk to the owner. If the owner's like, you know what, you're right, I appreciate that, and then something happens, great. But if the owner says, I kind of think that my manager's doing a great job keeping people out of the store because I don't like business or whatever, then at that point you've got to kind of decide to figure out something else. And it's okay if you don't play at your local store, and if you don't play at your local store, like I said at the beginning, then you don't buy things there. And then eventually the problem might just fix itself.